Hello, this is Catherine Bailey. I'm going to be presenting on the short story in world literature as my final exam presentation for English 501. A little bit of backstory. When I first decided to apply to Gardner-Webb University's graduate English program, it had been about 10 years since I had graduated with my undergraduate degree. So all of the writing that I had on file from those days felt a little old. So I went with the prompt that I was given for the sample essay through the Gardner-Webb English department. And that was on Derek Walcott's poem called The Light of the World. One of the complimentary essays that came with that prompt was the Geoffrey Gray piece called Walcott's Traveler and the Problem of Witness. And in this essay, it talks a little bit about how Derek Walcott, as a Caribbean author, was kind of being pulled under the microscope a little bit because he had spent so much of his adult life in Europe and the United States. And so there was a little bit of a question about how authentic his Caribbean literature was as far as him being a native is concerned because he had spent so much time in other countries. So at the time I didn't see how that would be a big deal or why it was even being talked about because I had not started looking at English studies at that point. So fast forward to September, and we are reading about literature and literary criticisms. That's the essay by Richard C. Taylor that we were looking at in this class. And in that essay, Taylor talks about the different ways that you can study literature, how it's broken down into different ways and methods to be studied, one of which is literary periodicity. Up until I started this semester at Gardner-Webb, the only way that I ever imagined getting a graduate degree in a specific field of literature was to study a specific time period or a different country. So literary periodicity is the only thing that I was aware of. However, having gone through this course and reading through Mr. Taylor's essay, I'm seeing that periodicity is a really good way to specialize in one type of field, but I didn't want to be one of those parochially well-informed patriots. I would much rather be a little bit more of the global citizen that he speaks of. So as we started talking about our identity piece, I'm definitely interested in literature. That's the track that I'm planning on taking with this graduate degree. And I'm also very interested in American literature and short stories in particular. So in order to kind of take that literary periodicity and turn it into something that felt a little bit more global, I decided to look at the impact that what I'm going to call superpower countries have had on smaller, less represented countries literary-wise through the short story text. One of the first people that I started reading when I was looking into this topic was Anne Enright. She is a short story author from Ireland. I've actually read a couple of her pieces. I really enjoy her style. It's something that I wouldn't have even looked at as far as a reading is concerned unless I had started working on this research project, so it's been really fun. But what she was talking about is the influence of the larger superpower countries on Ireland, more in a reaction to type of way. She quotes one of her childhood heroes, Frank O'Connor, who is another an Irish short story author. And he said that the answer for him in the reason there feels to be so much angst in Irish short stories is that it lays in the loneliness to be found among submerged population groups. These are the people on the margins of society. So Anne Enright is saying that Frank O'Connor's view of the Irish short story was really formed because of the socioeconomic impact that England had on Ireland as kind of a fringe country, or really a colonized country if you want to look at it that way. So it's a reaction to the history there, the socioeconomic and sociopolitical history between Ireland and England. But then there was another interesting comment that America is made up of immigrant communities, which is the reason that Frank O'Connor thinks the Irish short story is so prolific. So we also here in America have a really strong short story output simply because we are an entire country made up of immigrant communities. So that was a fascinating read there from Anne Enright. Then I looked at Morocco. So in this case, we're going to check out influence as an adverse impact on the smaller country from the superpower country. Author Abdellatif Akbib is actually the first Moroccan author to write in English, as opposed to his native tongue of Arabic. The short story, he says, in his essay that talks about the history of short story in Morocco, really came late to the scene in around the 1940s, 1950s. Part of the reason for that is that it had to trickle down through Egypt, which was the literary hub of Africa at that point. So it had to kind of trickle through that country before it got to Morocco. But on the other hand, there was a lot of political oppression going on because France was still in control of the Moroccan political scene at that point. So the artistic expression and output was not as strong in that time as if Morocco had been its own country. So here you have a superpower, France, almost suppressing artistic output when you look at Morocco in that time period. It's fascinating to think that the short story really started gaining traction hand in hand with the political movements of the nationalist group that started really gaining popularity and eventually overthrew French control of Morocco. So with that same political movement, you have a lot more Moroccan short stories coming out in Arabic and the development of the genre there. And then finally, I read through an essay by Miss Goldberg about an author that I had never heard of before, Ventura Garcia Calderon. And this is going to tie back into a little bit of the discussion of Derek Walcott from the beginning. Calderon was born in Peru to a very wealthy and influential political family, but in his adult days he actually had to become an expatriate and moved and lived in France for the majority of his adult life. He and his brother actually had publishing houses. They were very prolific short story writers. They wrote in both Spanish and French, I think maybe a couple of other languages as well, and he even earned the 1934 Nobel Prize for his short stories. He's called a naturalist in his style because of the movement, or because of the literary scene that he was with in France at the time, but all of his subject matter is from Peru. So here you have somebody writing about his homeland and his mother tongue and the people that he grew up with, but his writing style has been shaped by the European or the French connections and circles that he was moving in. So you have influence from this French superpower here as kind of an enculturation. It's how he developed his writing style just in general. So an interesting aspect there, that his subject matter would be much like Derek Walcott's, about his homeland and about his home people, but so much of his style was due to the new home that he had established for himself in Europe. So a couple of questions that I have about this research project in general and where I would like to maybe take further research here. I would love to look at how foreign texts change once they have been translated into a different country or a different language. For instance, if Calderon's subject matter was Peruvian, if he had written all of it in Spanish, then would he have been able to keep the same themes that he had as he was writing it in French? It's just an interesting question. And then how are expatriate or well-traveled authors influenced by their new cultures? If you have to live and to die in the same country in order to be considered a native writer of that country, then so many other people are going to have their work pulled into question as well. So just how much do these travels and these new cultures play on the subject matter and the style that we are using to write with? And then finally, how famous do foreign authors have to be in order to really earn and keep international recognition? There was not even a Wikipedia page in English for Mr. Ventura Garcia Calderon, not even one, and he won the Nobel Prize in 1934. So it's just a fascinating thing that he would be so famous and so well known in his time, and we don't know about him today. So those are the questions that I have remaining. Here is my Works Cited page. Thank you so much for watching my presentation, and have a wonderful afternoon and a great Christmas break.